So God says you're not required to observe the law, but Paul says that the righteous requirement of the law might be fulfilled in us, who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. We are not required to observe the law, but we are required to fulfill the righteous requirement of the law. Now that word in Greek is dikaioma. The Greek word for righteousness is dikaiosune. So dikaiosune, righteousness, is a kind of general concept. Dikaioma is a specific outworking of it. The same word is translated or used in Revelation 19 when it says, the fine linen of the saints is the righteous acts of the saints. So the word we're talking about is righteousness in action, righteousness worked out, righteousness made practical. And this we are required to observe. Let me read those words again. For what the law could not do in that it was weak through the flesh, God did by sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh on account of sin. He condemned sin in the flesh, that the righteous requirement of the law might be fulfilled in us who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. That raises a question of vital importance for every Christian, which is, what is the righteous requirement of the law? What is it that we are required to fulfill? We're not required to keep the law of Moses, but we are required to keep the righteous requirement of the law. And the theme of my message is simply the answer to the question, what is the righteous requirement of the law? And I am simple-minded enough to believe that it can be answered in one word of 4 letters. How many of you know the word? Love. That's right. Love is the righteous requirement of the law. Now, we are expected to observe that. We are not required to keep the entire law of Moses, but we are required to observe the righteous requirement of the law. Let me give you just a number of scriptures that confirm what I've said. We'll turn first of all to Matthew chapter 22, verses 35 and following. This is a conversation between Jesus and a teacher of the law of Moses. Then one of them, a lawyer or a teacher of the law, asked Jesus a question, testing him and saying, "Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law?" Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself." Notice, Jesus did not hedge, he did not compromise, he was absolutely clear. The 2 great commandments are love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. And then he went on to say, on these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets. The law and the prophets represent what we today call the Old Testament. So suppose that I wanted to take my jacket off, which I don't, and I wanted to hang it up on a peg somewhere. One simple fact stands out. The peg would have to be there before I could hang my jacket on it. And Jesus said, all the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. So the primary commandments that were there before the law and the prophets are the commandments to love God and love our neighbor as ourselves. And then in Romans chapter 13, verses 8 through 10, Paul writes this, "Owe no one anything." I'm not going to preach on that, but it's rather a demanding statement, is it? Owe no one anything. Don't be in debt. Owe no one anything except to love one another. For he who loves another has fulfilled the law. For the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, you shall not covet, and if there is any other commandment, are all summed up in this saying, namely, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no harm to a neighbor, therefore love is the fulfillment of the law. Love is the righteous requirement of the law. And then one further scripture, and we could choose many others, but in Galatians chapter 5 and verse 14, Paul says, for all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Notice, the whole law is fulfilled in one word. And what is the word? I didn't hear you. Love. Say it again. Love. That's better. Now, in John chapter 13, Jesus, I would say, related his teaching to what had gone before, to the law of Moses and the Old Testament. And in John 13, verses 34 and 35, Jesus said to his disciples, a new commandment I give you. Moses had given them 10 commandments plus a whole set of regulations. Contemporary Judaism has 613 commandments, if you want to know. Jesus said, I'll only give you one commandment. That's all. If you fulfill this, that's all I ask. A new commandment I give you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. What is the commandment? To love one another the way Jesus has loved us. And then he goes on to say, by this all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. One thing I like about Good News Crusade is that they have a powerful vision for evangelism. And I share that vision. I have evangelized many ways in many places to many people. But I recognize one thing, that no evangelist and no evangelism will ever reach the whole human race. There's only one thing that will reach the whole human race. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, if you have love one for another. That is the testimony that will reach the entire world. It is the love of Christians for one another.